Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Prodigal Son. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously, there's a whole complicated situation that Malcolm and his mom are going through, because the fact of the matter is because Ainsley's, her, video and everything of everything that went down in that episode connected to Martin is public, and obviously it ends with Jessica throwing one of her high heels into Malcolm's TV. That was kind of interesting because the moment he was kind of looking up because he was zoning out, I thought he had subconsciously threw his remote through the TV, but it's like, no, his mom kind of took care of that. I thought that was interesting. But obviously it's like this is all plastered all over the TV because it's like it's one thing where you have to be stuck with him always in your head. Obviously Malcolm's having a hard time dealing with that. Jessica, is this all kind of researched for her because like I think just as much as Malcolm thinks about Martin, I think Jessica does too, but she kind of, uses drinking as a defense mechanism to kind of, she kind of puts up this persona like everything's okay because I think that's her defense mechanism to kind of deal with literally the past 20 years of all this. I think even for her, she likes to pretend like everything was okay, but I think it, obviously it's always been there bubbling beneath the surface, and now you've got Martin in your face like 24/7 because like this report's getting played over and over again. So, but then obviously Jessica's also bringing up the whole aspect of like the girl in his suitcase. The fact of the matter is people thought you were crazy because of that. So now, I thought you were crazy, but it's like if we find this girl, basically in her mind is like, what she ends up kind of bringing up later on is that basically she thinks if they can find this last victim, like one that wasn't accounted for, they can make this stick against Martin so that he disappears and he never, resurfaces. They never have to worry about him again. Because for her, this is her way because she's trying to make it up to Malcolm because I didn't believe you. And then basically she blames herself for being like, I'm part of the issue. Which, Malcolm's like, it's not on you, Mom. You have nothing to apologize for. Dad's the one that's behind all this. He drugged me, he chloroformed me and everything. She's like, wait, what? And because for her, it's just more and more that's coming out because obviously it's like she feels like she failed as a mom. It's like all this was happening. It's like bad enough I find out he was a serial killer. All this time I told Malcolm all this stuff he saw was just in his head, but it turns out it was real. And now I'm also finding out he chloroformed you too. Like it's a lot to kind of take in, and she because she feels like, and she doesn't deserve to feel like she failed. That's what I'm saying, like what I'm trying to say, because it's like you did the best that you could. Like you've done what you can to try and protect your kids all these years from him, so and I like that shift, obviously, because it seems like, oh, maybe she was a villain, maybe she was a part of all this, but you shift that to be like, no, she is a very loving mom who's just as messed up as her kids because she's trying to deal with all of this just as much as they are, whether she's really willing to admit it or not. So I just thought that was kind of a nice element to it. Obviously for Malcolm, he can't really work the case like he wants to because obviously the FBI is kind of taking over, and Colette, played by, once again, Megan Good, has basically made it clear that she wants him nowhere near this case. It's like, yeah, they work together in DC and everything, and the fact that she hates his guts. But part of me thinks that it runs deeper than that. I don't think it was just working together. I think there was a relationship there. I could be wrong, but I don't know. Especially a lot of the stuff that she says, because later on, because the new case they're investigating is there's this cop named Ian Turner, and it turns out like he's in this hotel room with this prostitute named Emily, and so it looks like a murder-suicide, and then you had Malcolm like carrying around the gun, mimicking everything, and Gil's like, whoa, everyone's like, what are you doing? He's like, what? Come on, the gun's not even, he's like, oh wow, it actually is loaded, ooh, sorry, and it's just like, what are you being an idiot? It's like, but the fact is this isn't a murder-suicide, it's a double homicide. So now the whole question then becomes like, because at first it's like maybe, Edwards, I want to call him Edwards, I don't know why. I think because there's a comedian named Ian Edwards. I think that's what that stems from. But Turner wanted, the thought was like, okay, so maybe Turner wanted more, she didn't, so he killed her, and then, his sadness and like, oh my God, what did he kill himself? But obviously, well, there's a whole complicated thing of while they're working on their investigation, Colette comes in and she's like, actually, we're kind of handling things from here. And she kind of chews into Malcolm, talking about the fact is of like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, what do they call you these days? Because you're not a special agent anymore and stuff like that. But she talks about the fact is that he kind of turns everything into like a mother thing. It's almost like kind of don't bring your own issues into the investigation and stuff like that. He's like, just, I'm trying to like point out that this is, but she wasn't willing to listen. Just whatever went down in their past, it cut deep because she's not willing to listen to anything Malcolm has to say. And almost to spite him, she's bringing Danny on the squad, which Gil was like, okay, Danny, you work with them, but you, Colette, you'll have Danny for 24 hours, then we get her back. Obviously, which we did learn from that whole interaction because, you know, Colette's like, do you trust Malcolm? It's like, yeah, the fact of the matter is he's quirky, he's very like out, kind of goes about solving cases in a very like out of the box type of way, but yeah, I trust him, which is like you shouldn't, because it's like Malcolm destroys everything he touches essentially. The fact of the matter is it's like, oh, Malcolm said he didn't talk to Paul at all, but the fact is that look at this recording, there's that 2-minute conversation when Paul had him trapped between those bars and everything. It's like, oh, that looks like a quite a conversation they're having. And so it's like, don't let Malcolm be the end of your great growing career. But obviously Danny doesn't look at that the same way, because like obviously she even, you know, her and Malcolm have had an arc of them becoming friends. Even Malcolm helping her deal with some stuff from her past, you know, so she's going to be a little more. But even she does, like, the fact is, it's like, you're talking about Malcolm and everything like that, but it's like, aren't you bringing your own personal history into this case? You know, and it's like, she kind of is. So she's not being the most unbiased person in this case, like, because of your issues with Malcolm and everything. But it's like, the whole thing is, like, you know, because it's something that even, you know, Danny can understand if like, yeah, he might be a little weird, but he gets results, you know, that whole situation, which I skipped over it, but I love that whole thing with JT where he's like, yeah, I should be home eating my wife's Kringle or something like that. And Gil and Malcolm kind of turn to each other. I'm like, did he mean for that to sound as sexual as it did? And he stops because he does realize that. He's like, it's a pastry. I was like, I'm glad you corrected that. I love that. But nevertheless, the case gets even more complicated for Malcolm, the case that they're looking into Turner's murder, because it turns out this is one of his former partners is this detective Shannon, who has a connection to Malcolm because he grilled Malcolm all those years ago because he was the one investigating the surgeon case. And for him, he kept grilling Malcolm because it's like, oh, you know more than you're letting on. I know it. And he kept pushing him, which obviously there's a whole thing of like, I'm sure you're legally not allowed to interview a minor like that without their parents there. I know that. I mean, not unless that's supposed to be a thing of that's a more recent law. And that was 20 years ago. So maybe something like that is able to slide back then. But I feel like I've watched enough cop shows to be like, yeah, you're legally not supposed to be able to interview a minor without a parent's permission. So obviously, but then later on they kind of point out the fact is that Shannon is kind of dirty. Interestingly enough, Fox connection, I think is kind of interesting, is the fact is that the actor who plays Shannon literally just finished playing Alfred on Gotham. So it's just like, oh, that's interesting, you know, the Fox connection and all that. What's also interesting to think about the fact is, obviously, he's a British actor. Tom Payne, who plays Malcolm, is a British actor. Michael Sheen, who plays Martin Whitley, is a British actor. Well, to be more specifically, he's Welsh. Which the actor who, because that's the thing, like, you know, Welsh is different from just being straight up British. So it's like, you know, kind of the same but different. So I don't know what Tom Payne is. Maybe he's Welsh too. So that's why we'll call them British, like, because I don't know, you know, where specifically they're from. Like Thomas Payne, an actor who played Detective Shannon, are probably just straight up British, but I do know Michael Sheen is Welsh. But regardless, I'm going on a huge tangent. But because it's so weird to hear the actor who plays Detective Shannon using an American accent, because I've gotten used to him having a British one for like 5 to 6 years on Gotham, so it's just kind of wild. But it was interesting because, you know, this is obviously a tough spot for Malcolm, but he's like, no, I'm over it. The fact this was all those years ago. But obviously Shannon hasn't forgotten, because he ends up recognizing Malcolm because of Malcolm shaking hands. It's like, oh, I remember you. He knows Gil because he calls Gil Lucky Boy, because it's like he was working on the case for so long, and all it took was some dumb kid, Malcolm, calling Gil to basically give him the collar of the year. Like, basically it gave him, you know, he got such a major major case under his belt, so it's almost like I dedicate so much time. Him and Turner, they were obviously like this job whittled him down. Basically, it's kind of how he went. And then eventually him and Turner were partner up, but then eventually apparently Turner turned him into IA. And so that ended up making him lose his job, and so now he's kind of fallen on hard times. Kind of almost like it's not the same thing, but borderlining kind of like reflecting on old glory type of thing. But it's more so because this particular case, it meant a lot to him because I'll go ahead and talk about it. The fact is, this case meant so much to Shannon. And it's actually interesting. It's actually something him and Malcolm can kind of bond over that. Someone that was kind of like almost like this boogeyman almost to you in your mind because of something all those years ago, 20 years ago, now kind of turned into an ally because they were very similar because this case was so important to them. It's like, Malcolm was kicked off the case by the FBI because he's too close to it, too personal, too obsessed, which the same thing was said about Shannon. So they found some kinship in the case in that regard. And I thought that was interesting because we also end up finding out the fact is that Turner was actually gay. So the whole Emily being hired thing wasn't like something on that side of things because Turner was like, a squeaky clean cop. He actually took down some dirty cops on his way up the rank and everything. So they start looking at things from Emily's side of things with the whole escort business that she works with, and they bring in was it Macy, her boss? But her boss had nothing to do with this because it turns out like she sent Emily after Turner because she was hoping to seduce him and put him in compromising positions so that basically he'd back down looking into their whole thing. That was her plan, but obviously she didn't know that Turner was gay, so that wasn't going to work. So it turns out like someone else is involved in all of this. And obviously looking into Turner's files, Malcolm and Shannon end up finding out that Turner was investigating the junkyard killer, Paul. So it's like, okay, so now everything has literally come together under this one bill. And I'm like, that's so interesting. And, Shannon's trying to figure it out because for him, it's like he hated him for so long. He hated Turner for so long, but Malcolm kind of pieces it together. It's like you two are in a relationship, but the fact of the matter is he did care about you because look at all of this. He, the moment he found out about the junkyard killer, because Shannon's the one who laid the groundwork, but none of the higher ups wanted to really listen to him. And by the time with Turner becoming his partner, like obviously like all of that, the obsession with the work and kind of just not being recognized and being obsessed with the surgeon case, it kind of obviously like Shannon wasn't in the best mind state. So obviously he wasn't, the good guy he might have been at one point in time. So that was the only side of him that Turner saw. So it kind of led to Turner kind of turning on him. But now he recognizes but Turner picked up his files because Turner was trying to clear his name of being like, see, validating his investigation, like, see, he was right all along looking into all of this and everything. So, and for, Shannon, it's like he spent so many years hating Turner, but it's like the fact is, that was his guy and everything, and it's like, it's kind of, sad because they weren't just partners, they were partners, so it's kind of sad. That's why I'm sure this is also kind of hitting him personally too, because like obviously he had his issues before he found out the truth, but I think it was because there was still some part of him that cared about Turner. He went through this, but now it makes him feel even more guilty knowing that Turner did care about him and was actually trying to help him out more recently before this whole case. I mean, this case that was also his obsession ended up getting his former partner killed, So I think that kind of hits him and that, but then it's like, okay, so they had run through a list of suspects, which obviously new information that they recently found out is like, okay, the surgeon, Martin met Paul, the junkyard killer, at a hospital. So it's like running down the list of people on both Malcolm's list as well as Shannon's, and they find someone named John. They go to John's place. His grandmother, was it Matilda, answers the door. And the entire time, I won't lie to you, the moment they're eating, I'm like, Yeah, the fact of the matter is, I get the feeling she poisoned the food or something. I was thinking Shannon was going to die because I was like, yeah, but look at Malcolm's not eating any of it. I'm like, yeah, she poisoned the food, didn't she? I was just kind of like, I kept halfway expecting it. But I actually love the fact is when Malcolm entered there, he's like, oh, and even Shannon's like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, the fact of the matter is, this is the home of this is a childhood home of a serial killer. This is like almost paradise for like, you know, a profiler, because this is like, there's so much evidence around of just basically giving you a bigger picture of who your suspect is. Now he has a bigger picture and understanding of who Paul is, or rather John, and looking at all the religious stuff around him. And it's actually kind of interesting because we kind of learn a little bit more. Well, for one, we learned there was no father in the picture, which kind of goes like, okay, so that kind of plays a role in why he joined up with Martin at some point in time, because Martin kind of filled that role of almost like a father figure, I think. So that's that. Then we also find out that his mom was a heroin addict and everything. And so I think it was a thing of like, okay, and his grandmother being like, oh, she was a sinner and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, so his religious notions of like, oh, this is right and this is 100% wrong, like that's what makes him kind of choose his victims. Like, oh, I'm going to choose these sinners. They're despicable, they're deplorable type of situation. So there's that. And then Malcolm investigates his room and there's a closet with a lock on it. There's scratch marks on the inside. So he was locked in there because we end up finding out that basically Matilda's husband Benjamin punished him by locking him up and stuff like that. Because we also found out that Benjamin died. I was like, oh, some lightning strike brought down by God in the form of him working on a car and a car coming down and crushing him, which you can then apply that to, maybe that in itself kind of plays into how John kills people with the whole, he doesn't have to look at them, he crushes them, which makes you go immediately like, okay, because that's how his murder weapon of choice, it's like, that must mean Benjamin must have been his first victim. And now you add in the fact is him being tortured the way he did by his own grandfather, it's understandable why he kind of end up as messed up as he did in a certain regard. So it's a combination of just that religious angle, which it seemed like it was just Benjamin, but then like Matilda seems like she might have played her own role. I don't know, maybe she wasn't aware of what Benjamin was up to until maybe later on Paul did. And so it's like, oh yeah, like she looks and takes care of Paul because it's like, oh, you know, it's like he was failed by so many people. He was failed by my husband, he was failed by his mother and his father, who was obviously not in the picture. So it's like, okay. It's also interesting too because all his pictures in his book were clawed out, so it's like, okay. But sadly, by the time Malcolm gets back, Shannon's throat had been slit. I was like, oh, I had a feeling we were gonna die, but it's like, dude, that's, like I said, I thought it was gonna be poison, but him dying like that, I mean, it doesn't make it any better. But I'm like, oh, that sucks. But Matilda had let him know, like, yep, so they're in this together in the sense of like, you're not gonna capture my boy, my John. He's gonna get you. Which John ends up, you know, Malcolm chases him down, but John gets the best of him and kind of lays him out. Which, looking at the actor who plays John, he looks so familiar. I can't quite place what I know him from. Side note, wasn't he in an episode of Lethal Weapon? There was an episode where I think wasn't it an episode where he was like also someone who was in the military that's just as crazy as Riggs was. I think it was like a season 2 episode. I could be 100% wrong. Maybe not. But yeah, I think so, which would be, if that were the case, that would be interesting considering the Fox connection. But it's like, I definitely feel like I've seen that actor in something. I know his face. So I don't know whether it's just a Lethal Weapon thing that I could be mistaking him for another actor. But I feel like I've seen him as something else too, and I just can't place it. Or whether it is just a Lethal Weapon thing, if that was him, in fact. Regardless, going on the whole tangent and everything. So obviously Malcolm is starting to kind of remember more. Because now we also see the whole like, oh, because like obviously when you look in a closet, there's like a little latch for like, you know, for someone to be chained up and everything. So it's like, okay, so that's kind of where he gets that from. Like his whole, like, because obviously I think that's how serial killers do. They take stuff, like even how they choose their victims and stuff like that. This, you know, and it's something Malcolm has said, like some serial killers aren't born, they're made, which obviously Colette was kind of like, you know, some are just born, which I'm wondering, is that supposed to be a little jab at Malcolm because of the way he is, of like being the son of the surgeon and everything, and just being as dysfunctional and as broken he is, that he's just kind of prone to being a serial killer, which that's something we have never really touched on too. It's like, was his dad born a serial killer, or was his dad made as well? I think that might be a distinction we kind of might learn later on, but I thought it was kind of pretty neat, whereas Danny kind of tried to, because he was like, yeah, the fact of the matter is I'm broken, because, Malcolm had talked about the whole Eve thing. Eve has avoided being around him after that whole event, because like, I scared her away and everything. But Danny's like, I don't believe that. She believes that, that he can find some way to kind of piece himself back together through all of this. So I just thought that was kind of a neat moment. And also showing that, it's like, I think that is showing that despite everything, she trusts Malcolm. And it's like, you are my friend and everything. So the fact is, I can tell you are kind of screwed up. But despite all that, I know the type of dude you are. So that's where I kind of look at that. So I thought it was kind of, pretty neat. But obviously we have Paul taking him at the end of the episode. So there's that side of things. And obviously the rest of the team had no idea where Malcolm was. So they're probably going to try and trace his phone to probably get some idea of where he is. But obviously by the time they will get there, there'll be no signs. The only thing that's going to be left is Matilda and Shannon's body, which I'm curious what she's going to do about that. Not unless it ends up being a twist where he ends up killing his grandmother just to kind of can't leave any loose ends, or is she going to try and get rid of some evidence and pretend like wasn't here and all that? I don't know. Like pretend like they weren't there, try to dispose of the bodies. I'm interested to see where that kind of goes. So that's one side of things. Another side of things involves the whole Ainsley situation, because, dinner with mom and everything, which obviously we see, for one, Jessica going to Gil for help with this whole thing. Is like, if we can track down this killer, like I said, we can do something for Malcolm, for all of us to lock him away for so long. No visits, no more interviews and stuff like that. Him just kind of being in a dark pit forever type of situation. But obviously Gil is like, nah, I'm trying not to get you involved in all of this, because obviously he's seen what this whole thing has done to Malcolm, and he doesn't want Jessica to kind of get dragged into that darkness as well. Which it begs the question, it seemed like they might be kind of setting up a Gil and Jessica thing. Maybe not. Maybe it's just kind of, Gil's, I don't know. Maybe it's just him just being straight up a good friend, but obviously he cares about her. But part of me was like the way they were holding hands and everything. I mean, more so than anything, that was kind of just to disarm her. So it's kind of like to make her kind of forget about this whole situation. It's kind of because he knew he was going to break the bad news to her. Like, I'm not going to help you with this. Which obviously she's got her own plans, because she ends up taking the picture of the bracelet from the file. Which obviously that all runs into Ainsley's story, who's like, wait, you didn't watch my program and everything. The fact of the matter is, you could at least be proud of me and everything. Which obviously for her, it's like, the fact of the matter is, you got blood on your hands because you're pushing your father's narrative. You don't realize how you're being manipulated and everything. And for her, it's like, you're talking like a victim, which Jessica took offense to that, because Jessica spent this past 20 years not being a victim. She felt like a victim at first, but she made herself like, no, I'm never going to be a victim. I'm not going to let my children be a victim to all of this. But now it's like, but I think she didn't, I think for her, hearing Ainsley of all people say that made her feel like, well, you're trying to take away, say like, it probably makes her feel like, she felt like she probably got her power back. But now to hear Ainsley say that kind of make it seem like, well, you're trying almost insinuating that basically I've been a victim this entire time. And I just don't think Jessica liked that insinuation. That's kind of how I interpret it. But I liked her kind of calling Ainsley out, because it's like, you talk about victims and stuff like that. This had nothing to do with the victims. You did this little expose and everything, your little interview, but at no point did you ever focus or bring up the victims. Yes, you brought them up, but it's like you made it so much more about Martin than it was about the victims. And even Ainsley, I think it caught a little bit of her being like, wait, you're kind of right. But she tried to defend it, because it's like, this is about me and everything, which is like, yeah, you took this opportunity, something like this, and made it about yourself. You don't recognize how twisted that is. And even Jessica pointing out, the fact is, you threw me and your brother under the bus with all of this. Like, you kind of sensationalized this. Like, we've literally were done with this, and you literally threw it back in our lives. Like, you see how broken your brother is. And I think that's once again, Ainsley Ainsley's kind of broken in her own way because you can almost make the argument she needs to fill the hole in her heart too by kind of feeling validated, or because she even said herself she did it. Like, that's the thing about this family, from Ainsley to Malcolm to Jessica, they are super stubborn. The fact of the matter is, none of them are ever willing to admit when they're wrong or when they need help. Oh, definitely not the help situation. That's a big struggle for all three of them, So, but obviously, Ainsley kind of got pissed and left. But Jessica took her words of kind of like taking the narrative and kind of putting it in your corner. So she went public with the necklace and everything, and is offering a $1 million reward. Obviously pointing out that the evidence was also in the FBI's possession, which obviously doesn't make the whole bomb kind of drop on Gil and his group. It kind of drops on Colette, which obviously that's going to turn into some bigger issues, especially because Colette walked in on Gil and Jessica having a private conversation. I mean, I don't think she saw the hand touching, but obviously it was still a little awkward when she walked in. So I'm like, that'll probably turn into something later on, which obviously Ainsley takes this as a personal offense because it's like, me, your reporting daughter, you didn't give me the opportunity to break this story. But it's just kind of like, well, and you can tell at the end, Ainsley's a little salty about that. So lot of very, very interesting things. I'm curious to kind of obviously dive into this more, obviously going forward. Prodigal Son is not returning until January, so it's going to be interesting to see, what happens when the series returns, and we, we're going to have probably a lot of time with Malcolm and Paul. Obviously, slowly but surely, Malcolm is remembering whatever it was, that little hunting trip, what it entailed. I've kind of thrown out my thoughts about what it is, what Malcolm did, why he ended up blocking it out. Maybe it wasn't just his dad, but maybe psychologically he made it seem like maybe it's just his dad never drugged him. Maybe he just subconsciously blocked it out, and maybe to kind of fit that hole in his head, his mind immediately tried to compensate by, your dad's already the bad guy, so make him even worse of a guy, that try to be like, whatever you did, it wasn't your fault, it was your dad's fault. Maybe that's it, because even when Shannon was pushing him, he was kind of being like, so maybe there was some underlining stuff there that Shannon was kind of already pushing at, that he wasn't really ready to deal with at the time. To be fair, he was a kid. It's a complicated, situation. Malcolm's a very complicated character, so I am very, very interested to kind of dive in all this. When this, also, like, once again, finding out like what Colette and Malcolm's history is, like what that ends up being. Because, like I said, I know there's a story there, so they kind of, and also like what they're gonna do when Ainsley and Jessica end up finding out Malcolm's gone. I'm curious to see, where all this takes us going forward. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.